Okay, so we're going to do some backtracking and we're going to just regroup and talk about quadrilaterals again, because now we have to talk about them in a 5th grade description, okay, which is basically what I did in fourth grade, but I need to add a few quadrilaterals to y'all's notes, okay? So a description of each polygon. Remember that a polygon is a closed plane figure with 3 or more sides. So any figure where all the sides meet and it has 3 sides together is a polygon. So a quadrilateral is a polygon. All right, so quadrilateral. Remember in our notes before we put quad means 4 and lateral means lines. That's 4 lines. So a closed plane figure with 4 sides. All right. First up is the trapezoid. It is a quadrilateral because it has 4 sides, but it only has 1 pair of parallel sides. So a regular trapezoid looks like that. That means this side is parallel to this side, okay? Now, we don't say 2 parallel lines. We say 1 pair. Whoops. 1 pair, okay? We don't say 2 sides. So be looking for that because they will try to trick you, okay? Trapezoid is 1 pair of parallel sides. All right, then we have the right trapezoid. This is one that's new. A right trapezoid is a trapezoid with right angles. The other pictured trapezoid is also considered an isosceles trapezoid due to its having 2 congruent sides. So a right trapezoid would look like this. Kind of. Okay, so it has parallel side, 1 pair of parallel sides, and then it has 2 right angles. Okay, that is a right trapezoid. This could also be called an isosceles trapezoid because these 2 sides are congruent. Okay, 2 sides the same. Remember, if it has at least 2 sides the same, it is an isosceles. So it could also be called an isosceles trapezoid. Okay, so trapezoid, isosceles trapezoid, right trapezoid. Okay, make sure you're writing these notes in and drawing these figures, and you need to add this to your notes also. Okay. All right, next is a kite. A kite is a quadrilateral with 2 adjacent, which means touching, sides congruent. So that means those 2 sides are congruent. And these 2 sides. So those are the same. And those are the same. I know my drawings are small. You'll see it again in a minute. Okay. 2 adjacent sides are congruent. Next is a parallelogram. Parallelogram is a quadrilateral with 2 pairs of opposite sides parallel and also congruent. Okay. Okay, so it doesn't have right angles, okay? It has 2 acute and 2 obtuse. But this side and this side are congruent. Opposite sides are congruent. This side and this side are congruent. Opposite sides congruent. A quadrilateral with 2 pair of opposite sides parallel. This is 1 pair of parallel lines. This is 1 pair of parallel lines. Okay, parallelogram. Rhombus is a quadrilateral with 4 congruent sides. Opposite angles are congruent. Okay, you can also say that it has 2 pair of congruent sides. Okay, because isn't 4 congruent sides, 4 sides the same as saying 2 pair of congruent sides, because a rhombus, and mine's not going to look perfect, all 4 sides are the same, right? So this pair of sides is congruent, and this pair of sides is congruent. So a quadrilateral with 4 congruent sides, opposite angles are congruent. So that means this angle and this angle are the same, and these two angles are the same. Okay? So that's the same as saying 2 pair of congruent sides. All right, rectangle is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles. Okay? Well, when you draw a rectangle, it also has opposite sides congruent. Okay? Or 2 pair of congruent sides. Okay, 2 pair of congruent sides. A quadrilateral with 4 right angles. So it has the 4 right angles, and then it has 2 pair of congruent sides. This and this are congruent and parallel. This one and this one are congruent and parallel. Oh, they don't even have that here. 2 pair of parallel sides. I'll write it inside. Okay, so you need to have it on rectangle. And guys, you already have this in your notes. Just make sure you're adding to it. Rectangle is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles. It has 2 pair of congruent sides, 2 pair of parallel sides. A square is a quadrilateral with 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. So let's think about that. 4 right angles. It also has 2 pair of parallel sides. And then it says 4 congruent sides. Or you can say 2 pair of congruent sides. Okay? A quadrilateral with 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles, which means 4 congruent sides or 2 pairs of congruent sides. Okay? So if I have a square, all 4 sides are exactly the same, which means this is parallel to this one. These two are parallel. They're also congruent. So 1 pair. And then these 2 sides are congruent. They are also parallel. So that means the second pair of parallel sides and the second pair of congruent sides. Okay? All right. So now let's look at the hierarchy. This is what is most important. Okay, this is what you will see on test. Okay, so everything falls in the quadrilateral family. All right, so if we go off to the left, the only thing different is the shapes. Okay, so let's look at the shapes first. What do you notice about this one? Parallel, parallel. Okay. Does this one have any parallel lines? What about this one? Does this one have any parallel lines? One pair of parallel lines. Well, I know 1 pair of parallel lines is a trapezoid. Okay? Because that's what we just talked about in our notes. 1 pair of parallel lines. This one, looking at the picture, and look back at what we drew, this one would be called the what? The right trapezoid. So there's a good picture of your 2 trapezoids. This one could also be called an isosceles. Okay? So a regular trapezoid, also called an isosceles trapezoid, and the right trapezoid because it has right angles. Okay? All right, so let's move over to the other side now. We said that this one has two pair of parallel lines, but it does not have four congruent angles or opposite. It does not have four right angles or anything that we talked about. It doesn't have four congruent sides. So this one would be your parallelogram. And y'all should have this drawn in your journal already. We're just adding. Okay? And from the parallelogram, we notice it goes down into a family. This is like our family tree we talked about. This one is four congruent sides. And opposite sides are parallel. This is your rhombus. Which means this one, opposite sides are parallel. Opposite sides are congruent. This is your rectangle. Okay, which means this one with four right angles and four congruent sides is your square. Okay, all right, so this one has opposite, adjacent sides that are congruent. So that means this and this side are congruent, and these two sides are congruent. This is your kite. Okay, so again, trapezoid, isosceles trapezoid has two sides that are congruent and only one pair of parallel lines. Okay, the right trapezoid has one pair of parallel lines and two right angles. The kite, like we just said, has adjacent sides that are congruent and nothing parallel, no parallel. Okay, the parallelogram has opposite sides that are parallel and congruent. The parallelogram has the other opposite sides that are congruent and parallel. So the two lines indicate that these both sides are the same length. The one line indicates that these two sides are the same length. So if we looked at the rhombus, the definition of the rhombus is four congruent sides. So they would all have the same marking, all four sides. Okay? To indicate that they're all the same. The rectangle, opposite sides are congruent. So these two sides are congruent. They are also parallel. These two sides are congruent, and they are also parallel. And then finally, the square. The square has four congruent sides, opposite sides congruent, and parallel. Okay? So please make sure that you wrote those notes down. Make sure you understand what a right trapezoid looks like and what a kite is. Okay? Then also, you need to understand the hierarchy family. Remember, we've talked about this. A square can be a rectangle, a rhombus, a parallelogram, and a quadrilateral. A rhombus can be a rhombus, parallelogram, quadrilateral. A rectangle can be a rectangle, parallelogram, quadrilateral. A kite can be named a kite and a quadrilateral. A trapezoid can be a trapezoid and a quadrilateral. A right trapezoid is a right trapezoid and a quadrilateral. It's already named a trapezoid. Okay, so you need to know that the flow goes up and whatever it's connected to are its names. So I think that's all I needed to talk about today. You'll have an assignment that talks about the trapezoids, and it might have not trapezoids, but all the quadrilaterals. Okay, and what you'll have to do is identify each attribute. So make sure that you know what all of these are, and they are written in your journal. So you'll have to either put a check mark or an X on each item that is described by the object. Okay? All right.